basically just write essays for any random thought that enters my head. I have an insane backlog of essays that I've written over the years, re-edited or just drafted, that I've never made videos on because I either didn't think it was interesting enough, yeah, like that's ever stopped me before, or more likely I was just too lazy to put in the effort. I just like writing essays. It's a pastime. It helps me to organize my thoughts on a topic, study the opinions, etc. I only make videos because I'm a sad little boy who craves attention and validation, so I force you chumps to listen to my bullshit instead. Anyways, I just remembered that I never posted my thoughts on the Eden's Garden prologue thing, so I dug this up out of the dumpster. I had a little mini review at some point in a package deal script with a bunch of other things that I had a little bit to say about, but I shelved that for a while since it was a bit exhausting and it lacked good direction and it sucked. I never feel comfortable talking about fan games, especially incomplete ones, because historically, one, a lot of them don't get finished, and there's like a social pressure I feel. And I do understand to mostly say nice things about fan projects, because it's an obvious underdog contender, a game that was made in somebody's basement by a passionate group of non-professionals, so the fact that they got anything remotely respectable done and got something shipped out of the door is impressive by itself. The problem is that I'm pretty easily bored and unimpressed by media, so if I'm not having a good time consuming something, I can't really frame it in a way and say that I enjoyed it or I liked it, and say that, good effort, boys. I don't want to be an asshole and say, I didn't like this, I was bored, to a pet project people obviously worked hard on, so I would rather most of the time just say nothing at all. Also, I don't have much to say most of the time. Even in official media, I usually don't have much to say. I've seen so much media in my life that most new things I see just silently fall into an ever-growing vacuum of, I've pretty much seen this exact thing before, just in a slightly different package. Stuff has to really pique my interest, or a conversation has to really pique my interest in a unique way for me to feel like I can contribute to the conversation, and also things that I've already talked about in other videos already express my thoughts accurately on a lot of the conversations that just kind of repeat endlessly on the internet. So that's my biggest blocker for talking too much about Eden's Garden, as a currently unfinished project mostly. I just have no idea where it's going. I don't know the personality of the writing, So I can't tell at what level of depth or what wavelength of social energy I should be consuming this on. I don't know how to, what metaphorical thematic trends will surface, what abstract ideas are subtextually present in the storytelling. Is this some sort of meta commentary? Is this just a story? Do I just consume it plainly, what's in front of me, just the surface level elements, or is there something deeper, better hidden amidst all of the? I have no idea. I just don't know, because I don't know the I'm not familiar with the writing, and I'm not getting anything. I'm not getting any vibe checks from the writing yet. Bearing all that in mind, this is definitely probably the best DR fan project I've seen. The quality is fantastic, and it doesn't feel like... I loved... I do really like Your Turn to Die, but that's not really but it doesn't feel like it falls into the fan project trap of trying to remind you that it is indeed a fan project to the point of just trying to copy DR games. And instead, it's more confident in actually telling its own story, I feel, and making something that feels authentic. The pacing is pretty solid, relative to other ones. The tone of the game, and especially the color and liveliness of the dialogue, make the story flow pretty painlessly. The only parts I felt were meh during my entire playtime of the prologue were just some character introductions that I didn't like as much because the character felt a bit corny, a bit one-note, and a bit irrelevant. The thing about good, engaging dialogue is that it gets harder to do the bigger the cast is. Characters kind of need to speak differently from one another for their dialogue to feel natural. and keep from getting repetitive, and offer that, subtext for the characterization, for the speaker to read into. You want to provide a platform for the consumer to interpret more out of what you're writing. You want to give them a launching pad more than just telling them things directly. So when you have a diverse cast, sometimes you have characters where the writers are really good at writing dialogue for this character that fits this character, but if the writers do not have the personalities to get behind a certain type of character, they'll try their best, but it is noticeable while playing that the dialogue for those characters are weaker and don't sell you on their believing their personalities or feeling like they represent nuanced humanity. And I can't say I blame them. It's extremely hard to write for all different types of characters, especially if you're a small group of developers. Most prominently, you'll see this tons in, male writers cannot fucking write female characters, and it very frequently shows in, not in this, I'm saying, but in other stuff. Of course, the best characters are the most prominent characters in this prologue. Damon, Ava, Grace, and Wolfgang. All four are presented as the most major players. They get the, the dramatic moments, and their words are presented with more weight. They are all the best members of the cast, easily. They have the best characterization, the most nuanced feeling personalities, the least cartoonish, and they have the best dialogue. It almost feels like they wrote these characters and then realized that these four are the best and then chose to make them the most important characters. Because another charming point to all four of these characters is that they don't feel like characters that were written with stereotypical major roles in mind and thus accidentally made to be too predictable and cliche. They feel very novel and weird in a good way that feels like the devs really created something here. Damon doesn't feel like any sort of typical anime protag, even an edgy anime protag. He doesn't really feel like, you know what I mean. On that point, the biggest strength in this game's favor is how unlike DR it feels. It doesn't feel like, obviously this is just a prologue, but it doesn't feel like you can necessarily predict the ebb and flow of the narrative based on genre trappings and stereotypes. It feels like it can still fit into some of the molds and concepts of a DR game, but it clearly has a different spin in mind, and hopefully it embraces that more so than less. DR games don't have four major characters in the cast in the same way. They usually the way villains are really different but really interesting, and it's been a while since I played, but I recall really liking the potential of some of the new trial mechanics, although I've never been a big fan of the trial mechanics of DR games. The whole thing with solving the old case about some unknown victim and culprit with their own shit going on gives kind of Zero Escapee vibes more so than other death games. One thing that obviously stands out to me with this being a part one of a fan project still in development is that the areas that you're allowed to explore in the environment. I feel very underwhelmed by the small number of rooms that you get to see so far in the games, and I don't like the rooms themselves that much. The environments and backgrounds don't leave much of an impression, but I also see this as potential for the rest of this building complex we'll eventually get to explore to be more unique or stand out more. I don't know. I'm not sure. Because I also feel like that tree fucking thing is supposed to, leave an impression, but I really don't have... It's just a room with, a tree sitting in it. I don't know. I didn't fucking feel anything in the environments. Almost everything from meeting Wolfgang to the trial is honestly a bit dull, with a couple minor exceptions. I find myself skipping a lot through those parts when I watch reactors play through it. That's pretty much most of my criticisms. I wanted a bit more of certain things, of exploring a more striking setting, or a setting that feels like you're... all things from a setting resting in your mind to characters resting in your mind with feeling of a sort of unknowability of what's happening and what's going to happen, but an ability to invest in the current situation. it feels a little bit like it's not quite there yet. There's a noticeable dip in how gripping the scenes feel when you start to talk to the other random characters. They just do their introductions like a DR introduction, and nothing that they say, nothing that they have to say really feels that meaningful or consequential or like you really give a shit, unless you're an anime fan who, gives a shit about anything, no matter what it is. Like, you can feel that these characters just don't matter as much and have much less to contribute. They just don't have a strong presence in the narrative. And even, like, the environment themselves, it doesn't feel like the situation has much presence either, because it's a little bit cliche, and I'll talk about it later on, but it's weird to walk into a room with, like, a whole bunch of characters, but you talk to them each individually instead of seeing more of them talking to each other as a group, of there being, like, a group dynamic of everyone talking to each other, like, what the fuck is happening? It feels very weird right off the bat to just be, like, doing weird anime cartoony introductions as, like, the first thing, with no descriptors of what's going on and no sort of sense of irony, I mean, V3 kind of has that, but V3 starts with, getting chased out of a classroom. It starts with an underlying sinister energy that the character introductions that you're watching after the prologue are not cogent. But anyways, yeah, I mean, it's just very weird to just talk to each person individually, and they don't play off of each other. They don't, like, have, like, a strong, like, charisma within the energy. You just talk to one at a time, and they don't feel very important. They just feel like anime character intros, like the story was being put on hold just to introduce these disconnected whoever's with whatever talent and whatever cliched personality traits they each have. Even ones I like Winona, I'm still like, you don't matter. You clearly don't matter. There's so much less weight when she's speaking as opposed to whenever the fuck Grace or Wolfgang says something. Like, they're not even really involved. They are just civilians. Some of them feel extra out of place, too, like Jet or Jean or the pink-haired guy. I forget what his name is. It's not even because they're weird, but they just feel very disconnected in certain tonal ways from a lot of the rest of the game's writing and plot. Because the prologue does not have an overemphasis on comedy, at least not a lot of the type of comedy that's in DR. It doesn't have a very parody-esque feeling to it. But it still, like, weirdly doesn't feel as dark as it probably should. I don't know. It's not particularly lighthearted, but it's also not particularly dark and, like, grippingly serious. It just doesn't strike a very strong tone. DR games have more of a luxury in this sense because they are comedy games first, and they are dark dramas second. Like, you have a tense scene where a character might be fearing for their lives, but it has its tension broken by the Monocubs doing a gag routine. DR is very clear that everything, no matter how serious it is also a joke. Each of the mainline DR games kind of handles this slightly differently. DR1 feels the most grounded and the most serious while you're playing it. In many ways, it's the hardest to predict because you don't, at least when you first play it, because you don't know the personality of the writing yet, so you're not sure what direction it's going in. And so there's a much more of an air that any character might do something significant, that the social dynamics, there's something to be upset there, that the story might go in a very different direction and not be so patterned. DR2 gets away from this a bit because almost everyone in the group is trying to get along and be friendly, so characters don't need to necessarily seem like they'll make a big splash. Everyone generally cares about everyone else in that group, so every character is a unit that is part of an overall group that must be accounted for. So even if a character doesn't do much, they still feel significant because they are part of a chain. V3 probably has the most criticizable cast in this respect. It does have a lot more significant feeling characters and characters that do significant things in the narrative other than just have a chapter where they do a murder or something. But it also has a lot of duds. The characters that largely don't matter to the social dynamic usually make up for this in V3 with, like, really loud individual personalities like Shinguji or Tenko that most of the other characters don't really comment on that much, but still make a presentation. But then you have ones like Kirumi or Rantaro or, like, some others who just show up, do whatever they do in the plot, and then they just die. My point is, in this prologue, it doesn't feel like there's much of a sense of community or community-minded people in this group. It doesn't feel like it is a group. It feels like it's a collection of straggled individuals. No one is trying to organize the social structure. Almost no one has, like, a rapport or a charisma with each other. So there's no, like, feeling of the social energy of the group. It mostly just feels like separate characters saying their lines based only on their own personality, and if they don't seem like the tone they don't seem like the tone implies that they're important, they're very easy to not care about. Again, most of the cast I have no feelings on. They're extremely easy to dismiss. This is what it gets exacerbated by the trial mechanics themselves. The mainline DR gameplay was always the weakest part, and only got weaker as the games went on. With, ow, my fucking jaw. The trials in V3 easily being the weakest part of the writing of that game. You really get the sense that every character, other than the 4 major ones in a trial, are just bystanders who only exist to offer their shitty fucking comments or their simple bad arguments for you to either contradict or approve of. They feel very much like background NPCs. This doesn't have that, so having a decent chunk of time dedicated to serious stuff and then getting goofy, cartoonish anime characters in a pretty light tone feels more off than that. And yeah, like I said before, I don't know where the story is going, I don't know where the tone of the story is going, so there's a huge question mark about what the status quo of the game will be, or if it will be more fluid in its genre or tone. Most of the DR games are recontextualized by their endings. Like, to talk about any of the themes or the meta of V3, you have to already know the whole thing. Being 80% of the way through V3 is worthless. You still can't have a conversation with someone else about what the point of the game is and what it's doing in the writing. So this could also have that effect. I don't know. I will say most DR fans, even the hardcore ones, mainly appreciate the surface level plot and characters and stuff from DR, and they aren't as invested in the meta commentary that the game provides. So pretty much all fangans do not try to carry on the traditions of the meta. The fangan stories have nothing to do with parody or analyzing genre conventions in media and manga, or restructuring common tropes and recontextualizing them, or doing any of this meta shit. They're mostly just straightforward death game plots that are only copying, like, the surface level elements and, like, a facsimile of a goofy anime tone with silly shenanigans. I doubt that'll be different here. It could prove me wrong, but I doubt it. But I'm also more interested to see how they'll do the diegetic story differently. The trials in DR have always been my least favorite part, like I said. The mysteries in the gameplay are not that compelling to solve from a logical standpoint. It's hard to do good visual novel and puzzle games. The best one in recent memory, definitely Case of the Golden Idol, but Eden's Garden can't possibly structure their mysteries like a game like that. It's already established that it will have DR/Phoenix Wright style gameplay where you go through a linear dialogue and then you solve a single question that is pointed at you through the visual novel. So one question at a time, that it already provides you a select number of pieces of evidence and frames the question for you to just pick one and progress. I just hope they can pull something more interesting out of this dry stone-ass setup, make it a bit cleverer and more complicated, but I don't know. It's not a very good setup. it's not a very good, like, basis for making compelling, puzzly, mystery-solving gameplay. It's more a way of just, like, adding a little thing here and there to interrupt what is otherwise just a straightforward visual novel. I do like the storytelling choices in the first mock trial, at least for the characters that feel like they matter. Like, the storytelling of the murder case itself is better woven into the progression of the trial. Wolfgang has, his shit. It feels weighty, and it doesn't feel very cliched or, like, particularly forced as a dramatic moment in the way that V3 trials would feel like they grind to a halt so that some character or something can start saying some emotional shit in a really unearned way. The exceptions being Himiko in Trial 3 and maybe Kaito and Oma in Trial 4, which felt a bit more earned. And Wolfgang's, dramatic moments is directly tied to how they will go about the rest of the trial, so it feels more relevant to the situation rather than creating an arbitrary pause on the mystery solving to have a weird melodramatic bout. I also feel a bit nervous about the character logic of the story going forwards. Based on the ending of the prologue, this might also just be a me thing, but I don't like the logic that they often use in death game fictional stories about how, like, oh, don't trust anyone. Oh, actually, I don't know if you know this, but smart people, see, if you're actually like a super genius like me, if you constantly doubt everything all the time, and assume that literally anyone could kill you, even your own grandmother, that's smart, actually. Like, things work out that way because it is a dramatized anime storyline, so that you can have top 10 anime betrayals, but I still feel like characters should not necessarily be voicing these concepts as though they are the default rational assumption. They are much more of a storytelling trope than real logic. There's actually a lot of reasons for why people would not resort to murder in this situation, and a lot of other things that characters could be doing other than this. The irony is that the characters just say things like, you can't trust anyone, or the opposite, other characters will be like, oh, but you have to trust people, or people wouldn't murder. Like, this being the fucking argument denies the very reality that they exist in. If someone is so certain, like if someone like Ava, right, is so certain that murder is actually highly likely, why can't they discuss something more practical? Why can't they discuss rules, organizational structures, how to plan out the group's behavior to make it harder for malfeasance to occur? Like having a clear structure of leadership or daily patterns. Collect everything that could be a weapon and dispose of it. Having structures for people to be in groups of 2 or 3 to monitor each other at all times of the day. Encouraging common areas. Locking people's doors from inside and outside at nighttime or something. Rotating guard shifts, etc. The problem is, they don't even question the logic of these things, it's just taken for granted. It's a genre cliche. They just act like everyone will do their own thing and there's nothing we can do about and hang out, and that the only choice that you have as a person is just to trust people or be suspicious of people, but with no tangible difference in what that means with how you go about your fucking daily life. The clearest reason this bothers me in this prologue is that in the end, after the trial, right after the trial, Tozu tells them about the death game and that they have to kill someone and they'll get out, but also if they fuck up, they'll get executed. They don't even mention anything like, hey, maybe he's lying. He literally kidnapped us and is holding us at gunpoint in an unknown location. Maybe it would actually be really fucking stupid and weird to just assume that he's telling the truth and that he'll let us go if we kill someone and get away with it. Maybe the police are looking for us. The government that gave us all these grants are looking for us. Maybe we can arrange a prison break. We haven't explored this entire area. We don't know where we are. We can chip through the walls like an actual prison break. Some fucking douchebag escaped out of Alcatraz. I'm sure this is much less difficult. Fight back against the gun girl. You've only seen 2 people, only 1 person with a firearm. I'm sure you could fucking overpower her in some way or another. Maybe we can ride this out for a few days at least. Gather information, see how things shake down, discuss any of these things. Not even, like, 10 fucking minutes after Tozu introduces the concept of this killing game, every single character just takes him at face value. They just assume that the choice is either do what he says and kill someone to escape, or don't do that. They don't talk about anything else. They just assume that he's not lying. Fucking Ava has the audacity to say that it is naive to think that no one will kill each other, when I am thinking you have to be the dumbest rocks for brains fucking moron in the world and the most naive fucker ever to kill someone under these circumstances and just trust Tozu that he's telling the truth and, like, he will let you out if you kill someone. Like, yeah, playing this weird, incredibly suspicious random killing game that makes no sense from your kidnapper under the promise to let you out is totally less naive than having just a basic level of trust in your fellow man. Danganronpa gets a pass on this because it's a parody. One, because they do bring up a lot of these things, but more importantly, it is a parody dimension. It exists in a parodied universe where the rules of the universe, like the literal physical laws of their reality, are determined by anime cliches more than real life, including the decision-making of the cast. In DR, they kill each other because all the characters are parodies of anime characters who make all these dramatic decisions, and the twists and events that happen in the story have to be, like, tropes that they can make commentaries on because it's a commentary parody game. They aren't supposed to reflect real-life, living, fucking flesh-and-blood people and how they would make decisions. But, right, anyways. I was listening to the devs talk to Nezumi, and I feel like they're pretty on the level, in my opinion. Like, they were talking about Kodaka's writing. It was clear they weren't picking up on, or at least they didn't acknowledge the heavy meta angle of the work that's constant throughout the DR series, but they still understood the important stuff here. There was a comment I really liked about how Kodaka embraces the inherent fun of the writing, and that he trusts his audience to embrace the entertainment value and the human ability to interpret meaning from the ridiculous, silly content. And I've said the exact same thing before about how DR, as an entire series, like each game, the quote-unquote themes that it presents through his narrative are constantly changing every single game, because the point of the story is not that the diegetic story has a message, but overall, the DR series, what it's really expressing throughout consistently is a love of fiction, of how we can take the stupidest, most shameless, and overused tropes, and we can still spin them and breathe life into them and enjoy them. And have fun with the craft of telling a silly story. And how DR is a living test to try to prove that there are not bad ideas in storytelling. Everything can be fun if you really try to fucking run with it and be creative with it. That, at the end of the day, is what the meta of DR is saying. That being said, they did compare it to Undertale, Doki Doki, and Homestuck, all of which are pretty meta works, so perhaps there is this understanding and love of the meta angle in there somewhere. I can't tell. Like, I'll believe it when I see it. I've never met a living soul who gives a fuck about meta, except for people that insult it and talk about how meta is just shallow fourth wall breaks and nothing else. So I'm not waiting with bated breath. I am the only fucking human on Earth who likes meta. I obviously can't read their minds and tell what exactly they think of the DR games in every single way, but there's still always this underlying attitude that they're missing out on some level of respect that they could be giving it. Not that that's not the right way to put it, but I know saying that a game has flaws is not the same thing as ignoring its strengths or looking down on it, but I definitely think that a lot of fans of the DR series identify some things that they don't like, and they sort of get this sense of superiority over the game in small or large ways. Like, I'm a fairly prolific literary guy, and even after years of being a big fan of the series, I'm still discovering these little clever, tightly integrated hidden ideas and the deeper meanings to some of the previously, like, strange choices made in each of the mainline games. I just think that, yeah, we're all fans of this despite its flaws that we can observe, just feels like if they're like, oh yeah, we're fans of it, but it has really obvious flaws, but we still like it. It feels like an underestimating way to study the series, as though it's like a silly anime game with some wacky characters that sometimes hits an emotional beat, and that and a couple simple murder mysteries that, like, it's like looking at it. It just feels like you're looking at the series and saying that it has some really good surface level ideas. I don't know, man. Luckily, they're mostly doing their own shit with this game, so it doesn't really matter if they aren't capturing the full spirit and methodology of the DR games. And to be frank, I wouldn't want them to in the first place. I don't like copying things. I don't like anything from remakes or adaptations to anything that is just trying to fit into a mold that already exists. Unless the point is to make a commentary on the mold itself in a meta way. I just think there's a lot more to learn from the DR games than most people appreciate. And the fact that it has these clear flaws, or things that people think are clear flaws, makes them not appreciate some of the things that they're not thinking to appreciate, in terms of just storycraft in general, even more abstract things. I've talked a lot in recent months about reductivity, and I'm heavily of the opinion that there is no such thing as mastery. There's always more to learn, both in your own talents as a writer or understander of writing, and also from any individual case study. So reducing anything to less than the infinite potential that any piece of fiction has to stimulate conversation feels like a hamstringed perspective. And I think it's very easy for a lot of people to reduce a game like Danganronpa in your mind and assume that you can see all the things it's doing right and all the things it's doing wrong. Making zany characters that maybe you can kind of empathize with, maybe put them in an effective emotional beat, whatever, then putting feast or famine dramatic circumstances in is one thing, but really just making a character likable is about way more than that. Like focusing on them being cute, charming, having weight, matching the tone, having an appropriate presence and place in the dynamics. No character can just exist by themselves. Just being a little off-kilter. And yeah, if they're complex in a weird or interesting way you haven't seen that much before, or nuanced in a relatable way, that's also bonus, but at the same time, any direction you take can lead to mediocre content. Like, some writers are good at making charming comedy, but then they try to shove in, like, melodrama and try to make it serious, and then it turns to schlock. So everything has to be trimmed down. Every writer and every piece of writing has to be trimmed down to the stuff that is equally strong. Even a small section, a relatively small section, but that is noticeably weaker or more boring than the rest of the media, will have a large impact on an audience's perception of the game and the overall experiences. I think that there's also other visual novel games, even amateur ones, that are really good, but raw enough that you can really see the deliberate choices made by the small development teams to make it work. Even just, like, recent fantastic stuff that's probably tonally relevant. There's, I Was a Teenage Exocolonist that really melds, like, making cute characters and contrasting their innocence and cuteness against the existential dread of this incredibly dark scenario and these major character deaths, and it tells it from more of a bird's eye focus with a narration focus. You've got stuff like Being a Dick or Class of '09, which is the epitome of funny, zany, charming characters that are super endearing and relatable and make you care about them as people. Like I said earlier, Case of the Golden Idol is peak visual novel mystery-solving storytelling and wrapping up a complete mystery story in this, like, really tight, satisfying package. Other, like, modern classics like Steins Gate has a similar style of trope deconstruction to Danganronpa. Your Turn to Die handles tension and keeping a serious, like, keeping, like, a game fresh over the course of itself by keeping you on your toes with where it's going and how it will approach the next section. So lots of, like, you can always look to everything and see, like, the abstract ways that they're really, really good, the things that they handle really nicely, and, keep these things in mind. Do I have anything else to add? I don't know. I can only comment on what I see, but that's also the least useful form of advice. Criticism is the least useful form of advice. A game being good does not come from the removal of things that you criticize. It comes from adding things that are good. There are infinite potential ways to make something good if you add new creative things that are good. It mostly comes down, 99% of it comes down to creativity, having more and more ideas and cool things that just make more positive experiences. But it's also an ironic tightrope to walk. Creativity and being bolder and having new good ideas is more important than just having, something bland, but you fix all of its problems. But at the same time, writing is 99% less is more as well. You need to be very aware while you're making something of what works and what doesn't work as well. What to cut out so as not to spoil a good thing by grinding it down and or not letting the player enjoy the thing that you've created that is good and experience it on their own terms, and instead, turn it into this more stale bread kind of thing by trying to force it or over-explain it in a certain way. If your story isn't a meta-commentary about cliches and formula, then you really need to make sure your story does not feel like it's chugging along any sort of formula. Anyways, the prologue was good. Great work by the team. Interested to see more. Extremely impressive. Yada yada. That's about it from me. See ya.